you have a conversation, take it out into the hall, please. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee hearing today. Today we're only hearing one bill, Senate Bill 848 by Senator Woke. But before we take up her bill, let me give you a few housekeeping rules. We're going to have Senator Woke make a presentation after I give some introductory remarks. I'll open it up for Q&A by members of the committee. And I should note for the record at this time, Senator Fuller will be somewhat detained. We hope she'll be here before the end of the hearing, which we assume will be around noon or so. And but other members will be coming in or listening to it in their offices to the hearing. After Senator Woke's presentation and questions from the committee, doing it a little different today because, as you might have noticed, there's more than one water bond. And we're going to be having multiple hearings this year. Also, in regards to Senator Woke's bond, the purpose of the hearing today is really to focus on issues relating to specifically her bond, but because this is natural resources and water, for example, Chapter 4 will be addressed in another week in environmental quality, who has jurisdiction over those issues. So if you're here today to talk about Chapter 4, you may want to submit notes in writing, so we have them ahead of time, or you may want to mark your calendars and attend the EQ hearing. I think it's a week from Wednesday, if I'm correct. If you're here to talk about bond capacity and bond indebtedness, this may not be your best committee. This bill has been, and all water bonds will be triple referred, and that bill will be going to governments and finance, and they will have jurisdiction over those kinds of issues. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about the format today and our emphasis. Of course, this is just the beginning of the process. Multiple bonds. I lost count. I think we're up to 4 or 5. I'm not sure. It seems to be sprouting daily. So between now and July, we're going to need to make a decision requiring a 2/3 vote on if any bond should be on the November 2014 ballot or not. It requires a 2/3 vote in both houses. Approximately 2/3 of the legislators are brand new and weren't here for the 2009 water discussion, which makes things a little more complicated as far as institutional memory, changing priorities, changed circumstances. Okay, with that, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about sort of framing some of the discussion and things that I've been focused on the last few months and few years. I've been on the Water Committee either in the Assembly or the Senate. This is my 11th year in a row. Followed drought cycles up and down, followed the politics of water. It's probably the most hot political topic, drought or not, in the state. It's complicated. So with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about maybe more sustainable supplies, ways to look at water more efficiently and protect water quality in a different way. You'll notice 2 posters that I put up here. There's 2 posters. One is a map that I believe is over here. And Senator Munning and Senator Jackson, it's up to you whether you wanted to see the posters or not, or glance at them. Stroll over when you feel like it. Very good. Or we should have made you a copy. And one is a map. This came from a study that was done by a few Cal professors back in 2007. They were tasked to look at reservoir capacity in the state of California. There's a bunch of colors there, and the redder the color, the worse the capacity. For example, in this study, and I've read the study, it's about 10 pages long. It's in about 6-point font, which there should be a law against. In the study, they estimate that 120 of our reservoirs in California have had their capacity reduced to less than a quarter of their original capacity. Not a lot of preventative measures like catchment basins up above them. about 190 reservoirs, and this is a modeling exercise that they've done. They've actually looked at some reservoirs and then modeled similar conditions based on geology, et cetera. About 190 reservoirs have less than half of their original capacity. Half of their original capacity. If you start doing the math on that, what that means in simple terms, the sediment that is now filling our existing storage spaces makes up nearly 2 million acre-feet of water storage space that we have lost. That's double what would be capable of if we built the new site's reservoir. I'm just putting that out there because I think it's compelling enough evidence that we should look at the following. We should look at either how to prevent sedimentation. We should look at the cost of cleaning up sedimentation. The study also points out that most of the most valuable sites for putting reservoirs are taken up, most of them, with existing reservoirs. And so there's complications on where you put new reservoirs in relation to reservoirs that are not achieving their intended purpose. So we have invested heavily in reservoirs. We haven't done a good job of prevention of sediment buildup. I think that needs to be part of this discussion. Could be more cost effective than new reservoirs. I'm not making a determination one way or another. It could be done in a quicker manner, potentially, in some areas. It's certainly something to reconsider. So the focus of my comments are looking at some things that are different since 2009 that we've discovered that may make more sense, not just environmentally, but getting to the root cause. How do we increase water supply in the quickest, most cost-effective manner? You can see on the other poster over here to my right, your left, what sedimentation looks like, if that's the correct poster over there, good. So this is indicative of what is going on in some areas of the state. So loss of diminished capacity is a real problem and a real concern and should be on the top of our agenda. Okay, the second issue I wanted to talk about is groundwater basins and give you a little true life story. As we know, groundwater basins and groundwater management is something we could do a lot better on as a state. The governor is going in the right direction at looking at when groundwater basins have been overdraft and there's lack of sufficient management. They may step in with the state water board. But groundwater basins in other parts of the state have the possibility of obtaining some real good outcomes on reliability and more regional solutions. For example, I represent parts of Los Angeles and Ventura County and a great part of the San Fernando Valley. There's a large groundwater basin in the northeast San Fernando Valley that had been contaminated for years, mostly by World War II defense industries. I've seen presentations by the LADWP regarding this. According to their presentations, and they're ready to move forward with this, of course it would cost about $900 million, but according to their presentations, if they were able to clean out that basin and gradually replenish with water supply, which can be done technically, it would achieve and provide nearly 1/3 of the city of Los Angeles water supply. 1/3 of the city of Los Angeles water supply. Doesn't that go a long way to regional sustainability, reducing dependence on the delta if there's not more water but less water with climate change and other problems over the time? I think that's an incredible investment for the state of California to consider matching with their partners in Los Angeles. They also have a goal in Los Angeles to reduce dependence on the delta by 50% over the next 20 years or so. I don't know how they will do that. Of course, they have Mono Lake in Colorado and some other areas, but they're looking seriously at sort of reinventing themselves and not doing the same water supply strategies that we've always done over the last 50 years because of the climate variabilities and other issues relating to energy consumption, etc. I think that makes sense. The third sort of issue I wanted to bring up under water supply that I'm very excited about, and I want to thank Senator Wilk for including it in her bond. You know, they used to have a section called flood management. Well, flood management sounds like you're just trying to figure out what to do with the excess water during a flood and getting rid of it as quickly as you can. So we've sort of renamed it. We're looking at stormwater as an asset, not a problem. So there's a big focus in this particular bond of $500 million for stormwater capture and reuse. We call it the use it or lose it part of the bond measure. There's amazing amount of potential relating to stormwater capture and reuse. For example, the LA County Economic Development Corporation said in this greater LA area alone, we could capture 150,000 acre feet, enough runoff for more than 300,000 families each year. But I'm talking about not just when it rains. If you live in an urban area, there's a lot of dry weather runoff from people washing cars or lawns or various other kinds of things. We have year-round streams and creeks. The LA River actually flows year-round. Couldn't we do a better job at capturing and reusing stormwater, not just during storm episodes, but all year round? If you live in Southern California, the average person will come up and tell you, what happens when it rains? Oh, they'll all say it just goes to the ocean. Why don't we do something about that? So in this particular bond, and I think a major objective for regional sustainability, and it's a water conservation practice as well, investing in stormwater reuse and capture works in everyone's districts around the state. I'm also pleased to work with the administration in stormwater capture, flood opportunities, and other ways to do a better job at capturing this amazing resource. The last area in water supply I wanted to talk about is ramping up the use of recycled water. Many of you are, and I'm looking at Central Coast and North Coast people, are very interested in doing that. In the Senator Wilk's bond, there's 2 areas that talk about recycled water, not only in the storage component, but in IRWIMPs. We look forward to continuous discussion and how we can encourage that. Shouldn't there be a requirement at some point in time that we use recycled or reclaimed water, frankly, for all our landscaping, our Caltrans landscaping, our parks, our golf courses? Down in my area, we do just that. We use recycled water for all those purposes at school playgrounds, eventually dual pipe water systems into new construction. Absolutely should be part of the discussion. I'm actually a big proponent of, and it's included in a study related to fracking legislation that someone authored last year, is requiring use of recycled water if you're going to frack instead of clean potable water that could put pressure on a groundwater basin. Let's go on to the next area I just wanted to briefly talk about. That was water supply. The next is drought response. As someone who's been around long enough now, we've had 3 droughts. It is cyclical, we know that, but it's going to be more characteristic of a changing climate, dramatic water patterns, earlier melt of the Sierra snowpack. We can't rely on that Sierra snow to get us through the long, hot summers. But shouldn't it sort of be automatic that when a governor declares a drought, certain measures just automatically kick in and we don't have to talk about them in different circles all around the state? Mandatory conservation, absolutely, should be automatic. If you're going to say there's a drought, that's an urgency. We need to do something. Down in the Las Virgenes Water District, I live in an area that has a small water district, they actually have 10 things that are going to happen and how you can reduce your water consumption by 20%. And we did that in 2009. I think all water districts should be requiring that, including the agricultural areas. They prohibit irrigation during certain hours, can't have water run off your property into gutters. and it's a wide variety of other things. The requirement of water sensors, or allowing water districts or encouraging water districts to really offer conservation measures to consumers. So soil moisture sensors, a turf buyback program. So for you can rip out your lawn and get $2,500 from the Las Virgenes Water District. I saw that, but I didn't show it to my husband. He's already destroyed the front lawn, so he'll move on back. They're offering rebates again for low-flow toilets, shower heads, rain barrels for a certain price, limiting hours of irrigation. And why don't we include, if it's a real emergency, like the newspapers say it is, I think of the energy crisis, why isn't this a real massive media campaign? Why aren't we reaching out to the Home Depots and the Lowe's and the other places to offer rebates on more energy and water efficient washing machines and dishwashers, and the list goes on and on, shut off nozzles for your hoses. During the energy crisis, row after row of rebates. Where could you get that money? Well, possibly cap and trade revenue or other options through water districts. But I think we need a cohesive plan around the state that recognizes the problem, but it's a shared responsibility no matter where you live and whether you're an urban user or an agricultural user. We should pay farmers to fallow their land. I think that's been proposed. We have problems, growing problems, with more and more agricultural land being used for orchards, which require year-round water, regardless of supply. And in many of these areas, they have junior water rights, not the senior rights, and that creates an incredible amount of tension and problems. So I remember when Sheila Kuehl chaired this committee, she had a bill called Show Me the Water, which required, Bill Craven's shaking his head, he remembers that, but required that if you were going to build a subdivision of 500 or more homes, you had to be able to identify your water supply. Well, if you're going to be converting your farmland that had the ability to fallow crops in the event of a drought or some kind of response like that, shouldn't you have to be able to identify where your water source is going to be, even in drought kind of years? We have amazing problem in the Central Valley, not just snowpack and storage capacity, but the overdraft is causing some real problems, and I'm very, very concerned about that. So show me the water, whether you're an urban water user or ag user who's converting land, whether it's almonds or whether it's hay. And lastly, I just wanted to point out that both the governor's and Mr. Steinberg's plans have identified some very good drought responses, not only using cap and trade for water and ag efficiency, permit streamlining for recycling, et cetera, is incredibly important. But all these kinds of things that we talk about every few years when there's a drought, I think should be part of a message that when the governor of the state of California issues a drought declaration, these kinds of things automatically come into play, and they apply to everyone. So with that, I wanted to thank you for allowing me to give you a short sort of presentation of what's on my mind, but we now have enough people to establish a quorum, so let's call the roll, and then we'll hear from Senator Wolk.
Senators Pavley?
Here.
Canella? Evans? Here. Fuller? Hueso? Here. Jackson? Here. Lara? Monning? Here. And Wolk?
Here. All right. We have a quorum, so I filled up enough time, Senator Wolk, so that we do have a quorum. Please begin. And again, for those of you who just came in late, we're hearing just one bill today. Senator Wolk's presenting. We'll be asking questions, committee. Then audience may speak for up to 2 minutes each, no longer, because we're not doing the official oppose and support. Some people are supportive. Some people want amendments. It can go in, it'll be called in specific order. And if you're here for, again, to repeat, if you're here for Chapter 4 issues relating to water quality, those kinds of issues. That'll be heard in EQ a week from Wednesday, Environmental Quality Committee. If you're here for bond capacity and deadness, you'll be hearing that in Government and Finance in a few weeks in Senator Wilkes' committee. So welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I want to first thank the Chair and the committee staff, Dennis O'Connor and Mr. Craven as well, Bill Craven, for working with me over the past weeks to develop what you have in front of you, which is a mock-up version of 848, and I present the mock-up as author's amendments this morning. I want to thank the Chair for her introductory comments. I think the frame that you have proposed is an excellent one, talking about how to be effective, realistic, and above all, to be effective at using state dollars to assist local communities in doing projects that will have an impact on our water issues. We all know that the $11+ billion bond that's on the ballot and before the voters in November needs to change, and it needs to change significantly in order to gain the voters' support. It's too expensive and too controversial, and I believe it's a non-starter. But we also know, and I believe strongly, and I know this committee agrees because I've spoken with all of you in depth, we know that communities and watersheds throughout California need funding to address critical water needs. So the legislature has an important task, and that's to provide voters with a sensible, effective, realistic, and above all, supportable water bond as soon as possible. And with the drought conditions in the state, we need to fund programs and projects that will increase water reliability at the local and regional levels faster and more effectively than we have in the past. I present a water bond that has a $6.8 billion price tag, and I believe these are urgent water needs in California, and I'd like to go through them. As the Chair said, beginning in Chapter 4 is about safe drinking water. It is a statewide issue, and I will just briefly say, in addition to addressing these issues in the Committee of Jurisdiction, which is the Environmental Quality Committee, we all know that 3% of the state's population do not have access to safe and clean primary sources of drinking water, which means that we're talking about 1 million people. In a state like ours, that's unacceptable, and I look forward to the discussion next week. This is an extremely important part of this bond. The next chapter, Chapter 5, is water supply enhancement projects. This is the area where you have integrated regional water management plans. These are statewide plans. The money is divided by hydrologic region, not unusual. That has been the approach. The funding can be directed to whatever the local communities, the regional communities who have put together these plans have listed as their priorities. There is a local match, but again, it is important to allow for disadvantaged communities and for those areas that have unique challenges to be able to deal with that match, and discretion is given not only to reduce that match where appropriate. And through the bond, you will see in various areas the focus on communities that have great need and really need to be able to have the technical assistance and the wherewithal to move forward quickly to provide better water service and good water service. In addition, in this chapter, what the Chair talked about, you will find stormwater capture and reuse projects. These are statewide monies, and again, I agree with the Chair when she makes this is an asset, stormwater, and we need to recognize that and move forward with encouraging that reuse. The next chapter, Chapter 6, is the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, something near and dear, of course, to my heart. There are funds here for ecosystem restoration, for water quality, community sustainability. The money is appropriated to the Delta Conservancy. The Conservancy is directed to coordinate and collaborate with whatever city or county where the project is taking place. You cannot use funds for eminent domain. There needs to be ecosystem restoration and water quality projects, and a certain percentage of the funding, not a percentage, but a certain of the $800 million that is set aside here, at least $500 million has to be on ecosystem improvement. There is also money set aside for delta levees, and that would include levee upgrades and improvements. No matter what happens to the California water system, water will still be flowing through the Delta to Southern California and to the Bay Area. So it's really critical that the levees, not all of them, but the key levees, remain in good condition. The next chapter, Chapter 7, is again statewide, watershed and ecosystem improvement protection. There is money set aside for what has been, in a sense, are contracts already entered into by the state, and that would include the Klamath River settlement agreements, the QSA, the Salton Sea agreements, the San Joaquin River restoration, and the Tahoe Conservancy. There is also $875 million, which is set aside for the enumerated local conservancies. Wow, that's exciting. Coastal Conservancy, Wildlife Conservation Board, Ocean Protection Council, established and enumerated in state law, and frankly, the allocations mirror those that are in Prop 84, which we thought was a good idea. There is also money set aside for to the Natural Resources Secretary, which funds multi-benefit watershed and urban rivers enhancement projects in urban watersheds that would increase regional and local water self-sufficiency. It's important to note that the eligible funding for these conservancies is not for all their projects willy-nilly, although they're wonderful and we love them. That's not the case. They have to be really focused on watershed improvement and water projects, and that's written into the bond. The last section is the water system operation improvements, storage, I would say. It is again of statewide importance. We actually took the chapter that is in the existing bond and pretty much used it as is, because there was a lot of discussion about public benefit, and we retained that language. Our pro tem was very much involved in those discussions, as was, I'm sure, the chair. But we have added some things, hoping to get money out the door for necessary storage quickly on things that can happen quickly. And what the chair mentioned about the sediment buildup is important, and we've added that. And the reasoning is exactly what the chair said. Recent studies show, and this map, the map's gone. That wonderful map shows we have an extraordinary number of reservoirs that have capacity that is not being used in the existing system, because of the sediment buildup that exists. And the estimate is somewhere between 1.6 million acre feet and 2 million acre feet. That's extraordinary, and probably a very cost-effective way of getting at them would be getting at that storage quickly, would be cleaning out that sediment buildup. There are also seismic issues with some of our existing reservoirs and dams that ought to be fixed, and may well be something that can be achieved quickly and increase supply. I'm thinking in particular the San Luis Reservoir. Senator Fuller mentioned Isabella. I'm not an expert in all these reservoirs. Now that I know there's so many, I understand why. But certainly that's something we should proceed with. In addition, the major we allocated $25 million to DWR to look at the feasibility of other surface storage projects, those that may be ready to go more quickly than the CalFed projects, not all the CalFed projects, but some of them. The last thing that is very different in mine from the existing storage chapter is that I remove the continuous appropriation. I believe that accountability for public money is critical, and an expenditure of $1 billion needs to have legislative oversight. Now, that being said, and I've said this publicly as well, I'm not interested in throwing roadblocks in front of projects that are ready to go. I don't think so. But that's different from saying there is no accountability or no oversight by the legislature on an amount of that amount. So with that, and the last chapter has to do with general provisions. We have again, we have retained this from the existing bond. Of course, it's important. It has to do with water rights. Also, the Delta Reform Act is put into this as well. Their projects have to be consistent with that. We prohibit funding for construction, mitigation, or operation of new conveyance. That is not different than the existing bond. And we prohibit funding for mitigation or compliance obligations of any party. Again, not different from the existing bond. The fiscal provisions, we have added, and this will be, assuming this gets through the two committees, when we get to governance and finance, the staff will be looking at this closely. We take unappropriated, unencumbered funds from the bonds from the year 2000 and before, which are just unencumbered, unused for whatever reason, and incorporate those, ask the public, ask the voter to reorient that money, and let's get it used in an appropriate fashion. So that is the construction. I just wanted to say something general about the committee. The committee is a microcosm of the state of California, from the North Coast to LA to San Diego, rural, urban, coastal, and Central Valley, northern Central Valley as well as deep Central Valley. I think when we had this discussion 2 weeks ago, I'm trying to remember, 2 weeks ago, I listened very carefully to your specific concerns, and I've tried to meet with each and every one of you. I think it's possible to craft a consensus bond for this state. I think it's essential that we do that. And by that, I mean we all have to make compromises in order for the voters to say yes. And that our struggle will be, as we go through this, now that there are other bonds, is to try and keep this at a reasonable amount of money. I think 6.8 is too high still, a bad place to start. I wanted to start much lower. But I was persuaded that there were needs that needed to be incorporated, and that's how we got to 6.8. I think that one of the greatest dangers here is that we just keep adding and adding and adding. So it's going to be very, very difficult, but I think we all need to do that because I do believe we need a water bond. And lastly, I would just say, the key person here truly, in addition to the legislature, is the governor. There are other demands on the public dollar that may come forward for bonding. There may well be education concerns, that we know that there are transportation concerns, and there may be well others. So I think this is the beginning of a long process. Even though it's a short amount of time, it's a long process in the sense that many different interests have to be accommodated, and I look forward to working on this issue and trying to come up with an action that will be supported by 2/3 of the legislature and the governor, and that we can move forward on. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Volk, and again, fellow committee members. This would be the time to either make comments or ask Senator Volk specific questions. Then we're going to hear from members in the audience not to exceed 2 minutes each, and I will ask you to adhere to that. And if you have something that's repetitive, just state your name and affiliation, say agree with the comments by so-and-so that preceded me. Also would like to note, just for the record, each member has the mock-up language with them. It's on the committee website. Copies have been available outside our office. The mock-up will be in print, according to Mr. O'Connor, later this week, correct? And available to everyone. And, yeah, with changes that Ledge Council has typically made changes to. And Senator Hueso, I noticed your hand is up. We'll go from south and then to the north.